Um, I guess the way to answer this question is kind of quickly go over how uh, ESOP works, and then I'll highlight the differences on the ETOP. So bear with me for a few minutes while we kind of unpack this. Employee stock options come from what a company would designate as a pool for employees or advisors or other stakeholders that could receive future shares. So the common question I pose to people or I highlight is options are not shares in a company. Options are the right but not the obligation to buy future shares. They do not exist yet, but need to be accounted for on a cap table, which we at Sprout also help companies and founders manage the entire kind of equity side of things. And so what happens is you take a look at your total outstanding shares and you create a pool of future shares. Typically, you would start, based on statistics around 5%, and then start growing that, and you can exceed 10%, 15% as you start raising subsequent rounds of financing. So this pool would be where you would allocate shares for employees. Let's just use employees as an example. So then what happens is there is an action that you take with the board in terms of creating the pool, creating the grants, and then providing those grants to an employee. Employee joins, and as part of their offer letter, they get traditionally, here's your cash, here's your equity, and here are the rules to the stock option plan. Generally, without getting into too many details, there is a vesting mechanism. It's usually time-based, but it can also be milestone-based. But let's say best practice, 3 to 4 years of vesting. Typically, you do not get any shares vested in the first year, and they call that a cliff. That is to ensure that employee and company, are suited for each other. And so typically you would get a large percentage, if it's 4 years with 1 year cliff, then that's 25% on the anniversary, first year anniversary. Then you would get those shares, you have rights to it. And then over time, based on certain events, then the company would allow those employees to buy the shares, and that is exercising your right to buy the shares, and so that is known as exercise. So you have the grant, the vesting, and then the exercise. Once you are exercising and you buy the shares, then those shares are yours until you sell, and then you join what is known as the cap table, which is a list of all the shareholders and all the underlying information that comes with it. So that is how it works in general. The reason people come to us is because they're very difficult to track, especially if you're talking about 50 to 100 employees, and there's a lot of different vesting schedules and different timing. Everyone comes in at different periods of time. So in the beginning, most people use Excel spreadsheets to track it, but it just becomes very difficult. And then administrative-wise, HR teams are having a difficult time to track and manage. So then software really comes into play. What we do at Sprout is also help coach, mentor, and help people think about and design what's the right plan. There is no perfect plan or same plan that fits everybody. So we help kind of listen and provide some advice. I'll pause there and then transition to the token side. So ETOP side, there is the notion of this pool, but it doesn't really take any legal form. Oftentimes it can be from an existing wallet or an allocation. Typically it comes from what we call the treasury wallet. So the treasury wallet holds all your tokens for any organization. And similar to ESOP, there is a vesting. Now the biggest difference is there's no exercise. Once they vest, they are yours to do whatever you want with it. And so, that's part of the decentralization of these assets. And the way they are transferred to you is also quite interesting. Traditionally, they have, as modern or as technologically advanced, as people talk about the blockchain and all the technology around it, the dirty little secret around token vesting is that it's an extremely manual process. I've heard stories, I won't say which very large exchange has a person in finance who's in charge of manually distributing tokens from the treasury wallet into each and every individual in the company.
Oh my
He does this twice a month.
Wow.
And it is incredibly manual. So if you're familiar with, holding, Bitcoin or Ethereum on these little ledgers, imagine this poor individual is transferring using the ledger, moving, tokens from one token to another one, right? And that's all on the basis, again, of Excel.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's still a very new process.
Yeah.
And so what people in the last few years have tried to do is create what is known as smart contracts. Smart contracts basically is a very short kind of line of code. Hopefully it sets some rules and basically says, on this certain time, you will receive X amount of tokens as part of vesting. You could set it up that way, but not everyone does it because the blockchain is very immutable. And so when you put something in there, oftentimes, you have to go back and create, another smart contract or another set of scenarios to kind of cancel out or to stop that transaction from happening. So people still prefer to do it sort of the old-fashioned way. And so that transfer over can occur in two different ways. One is we call it an airdrop, right? Which is I push it over to you. And the big difference, one of the additional differences between ESOP and ETOP is ESOP is all kind of theoretically happening, where there's actually no action taken until you buy the shares, and then you're issued a share certificate and the company secretary gets involved. In the case of tokens, there's actual real execution that's happening. And so when you are transferring, for people that are familiar, when you're transferring from a treasury wallet to another wallet, you have to pay a transfer fee called a gas fee.
Yeah.
And it gets pretty expensive. And so there's another mechanic involved, which involves the action they call claiming, which is it's more of a pulling mechanism, and employees would then claim the tokens, and thereby they pay for the gas fees.
Okay.
So there's a difference. So you actually have real transactions and real fees, and there's an additional cost of doing this, which again, current situation, aside, it's been very lucrative for the past 5 years in this space. So it's a very kind of emerging opportunity. And I would come back and say the biggest difference also from an employee standpoint is the mindset and the understanding around it. ESOP is a bit difficult to kind of understand unless you've been at a bunch of startups and received that, the grants and exercise and that exit. And if you haven't, then it still remains a bit of a mystery.
Yeah, I mean, it's great,
so
honestly. A
for
lot of
the current
founders,
generation of
thinking
people
about it
in
these days,
Web3, it's a
bit,
younger crowd,
questionable.
Gen Y, Gen Z.
So on that note, what
They totally
ETOP
get
now,
tokens.
and why
So
should
from
people care
a
about ETOP?
operations
Saying it right?
standpoint,
ETOP,
it's much easier. It's definitely been on the radar quietly, you don't have to
especially
explain
in the
tokens
world
to
of
young people.
Web3. They probably understand it better.
I think
I'm not a big fan of the word Web3, but
versus explaining the value
say
of
that it includes crypto
stock
and
blockchain.
blockchain.
Why should I care?
ETOP stands for employee
why does it
token
matter?
ownership
Plans
in
places like Hong
most
Kong,
people
where,
don't call it
cost of
ETOP.
living is
Most
not the
people
cheapest.
know it as
People
token
are
vesting,
very
which
sensitive
is
to
the word vesting is also an interesting
right?
word.
So
It's
basically
cash
a fancy word
remains
for
key
saying
in a lot of
for
areas
representing
tokens.
distribution.
or actually
the idea behind
token
token vesting
an
is
asset
very similar.
and
If you think about sort of equity vesting, is that you don't get all your
if you
tokens
think about
or
cash
equity
as
all
immediate,
at once, and you think about equity,
and it's
sort of
time
drips
horizon,
that
risk
over
return
an
is
extended
far
period
at
of time, you know.
and so
It takes
that-
longer to get,
but
you
that
get way
distribution
more
over time
potential return on equity.
It has become tokens actually sits in the
quite
middle
popular
terms of its
in the
liquidity
Web3 world,
and its
where
risk return.
you would actually
Although right
see
now it's pretty
many
risky,
cases, especially with the big firms like
the
Binance,
liquidity part
Crypto.com,
is it's much more liquid
or
because again,
popular
you
kind
can
of
sell
DAOs
it,
where
you can off-ramp it,
people are
turning it
exclusively
into
paid
fiat and then
in
pay your
tokens.
tokens versus
And
equity.
if you are coming from a very traditional kind of background